Yesterday on the program, I presented the case to you that Donald Trump will win the election in November. And as I said during yesterday's segment, this is a thought experiment. We don't know who's going to win the election. It all depends on all of us going out and voting this fall. But the point yesterday was to show that one can make a very persuasive case that Donald Trump is going to win, that he has the clear and even obvious path to being the next president of the United States. Now, the reality is the race will almost certainly be decided by 250,000 to 500,000 votes in 3 to 5 states. And when a race is this close in a country of 340 million people, there can be no obvious prediction. Those saying it is obvious one or the other candidate is going to win are not based in fact. But as I did yesterday with Trump, making the hypothetical obvious case for Trump's inevitable victory, today I'm going to steelman the case that it is actually President Joe Biden who will win the re-election. And the goal here is to be just as persuasive and to make just a seemingly obvious a case for Joe Biden winning in November as I did yesterday for Donald Trump. So let's get into it. Why is it so clear that Joe Biden is the one who has the easy, direct path to victory in November and not Donald Trump? Well, let's start with polling, just as I did yesterday with Donald Trump. The criminal conviction of Donald Trump has given Joe Biden a slight bump in the polls to the point where the popular vote polling is essentially a wash. The recent national polls are all showing Joe Biden up +1 or 2, or maybe it's Trump +1, or it's even a tie. And as far as the swing states go, Biden is down in many of them, as we talked about yesterday, but very much within striking distance, within the margin of error in many of the polls. And we now have new state polling post-conviction. So we'll find out very soon how much of a role the conviction is playing, but it is certainly pushing some voters towards Joe Biden. And this is the critical thing. Remember that Biden doesn't even have to win all of the states he won in 2020 to get the 270 electoral votes that he needs to become president for 4 more years. Or to put it another way, Biden has a margin of error that not only does Donald Trump not have, Trump needs to get everything he got in 2020 and find more states to take from Joe Biden. And that is a much more difficult path for Trump and a much easier path for President Joe Biden to get reelected. I'll give you some examples. President Biden could lose Georgia, which he won in 2020, Arizona, which he won in 2020, and Nevada, which he won in 2020, and still win the election if he holds Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania. And of course, there's a whole bunch of other combinations that would lead to the same outcome, which is Biden not doing as well as 2020 and still winning. That's a very strong position to be in. There's a new ABC News Ipsos poll, which finds that a majority of independents think Trump's verdict was correct, 52%. And that same number believe that Trump should end his candidacy altogether. That's a disaster for Donald Trump, given the starting point of he already lost 2020 and he needs to take states from Biden. Another post-conviction poll from Morning Consult finds that 49% of independent voters believe Donald Trump should drop out of the race flat out on the basis of being convicted on those 34 felony counts. Very, very troubling poll for Trump. So Trump may have a real difficulty shaking off the weight of convicted felons, something that Joe Biden has started to use in reference to Donald Trump. And his criminality is going to remain on the minds of voters as we approach sentencing on July 11th, and then the other 3 criminal trials, if we have any of them before the election. The other trials, by the way, are in a great sense more serious than the one Trump's already been convicted in. Two of them relate to his efforts to try to steal the last election. One has to do with his reckless mishandling of classified documents. So if we're already seeing the influence of the first conviction, which, again, remember, even if only 15% of Republicans change their minds because of the conviction, the margins are so slim in some of these states that that would make it an impossibility for Donald Trump to win. If we see further convictions, we could see an even more difficult time for voters to send Trump back to the White House. Now, I should also point out that while I don't personally expect Judge Merchan to sentence Trump to prison, it still is a real possibility. And if that does happen, I believe it worsens Trump's chances even more. I know he and some supporters are saying, if they throw this guy in prison, we will all come out and Trump will easily sail to another 4-year term. I think that there are many voters who are not engaged in the Reddit and Twitter discussions who will say, I'm not voting for a guy who's in prison. It just doesn't make any sense. So that's polling. Now let's talk about incumbency and previous elections, because this is another reason that Joe Biden is likely to win. He has the incumbency advantage. In recent U.S. history, it's become the norm for presidents to get reelected. Now, Trump losing in 2020 is more of an exception than it is the rule. Barack Obama, George W. Bush, Bill Clinton, all two-term presidents. We go back to George H.W. Bush losing in 92 as the last time other than Trump for a president not to get reelected. It's very rare. We also have to consider that since Donald Trump's win in 2016, Republicans have been a failed party, a completely failed party. It's been a downhill disaster for Republicans, starting with the 2018 midterms through the 2020 election, the 2022 midterms, the off-year elections. In 2018, they lost the House after that blue wave. In 2020, Trump and Republicans lost the presidency and the Senate. In 2022, there was going to be a red wave. It didn't happen. Republicans just barely took control of the House and actually fell further behind in the Senate. And then 2023 was a very bad year for Republicans, even in red states like Kentucky and Ohio. Ever since Donald Trump initially was voted into power in 2016, Republicans have either lost or underperformed what we would have expected historically. They are losers since 2016. Why do we expect the convicted guy to turn it around after losing so many times? This is also the first time that Donald Trump's name will be on the ballot in a general election since the Trump riots of January 6, 2021, which, according to a Washington Post poll, 55% of Americans believe were an attack on our democracy that should never be forgotten. All of that is a train wreck for Donald Trump. Next, we have the debates. Now, I recently told you on the program that debates typically, historically, do very little to affect the outcome of a presidential race. And that is true. However, it is possible that this time will be different, thanks to Republicans continuing to set these ridiculously low expectations for Joe Biden, because Republicans have repeatedly fallen into their own trap of saying Biden's too old, he's too senile to speak publicly. And then Biden does fine and comes out looking good by comparison because the bar has been set so low. They said this about Joe Biden's primary debate with Bernie Sanders in 2020, which went fine for Joe Biden. They said this about the two debates that Donald Trump had with Joe Biden in the general election in 2020, went fine. They said earlier this year, Biden isn't going to be able to give a 100-minute State of the Union speech. He can't do it. And then he did so well that they switched to claiming that he must be on some kind of drug without ever being able to identify what drug would achieve what they claim the drug did. So as long as Biden does as well as he's done before, he might actually end up getting a boost from the debates as well. At minimum, there is no obvious path for convicted felon Donald Trump to perform so well in the debates that it helps him. He's counting on Biden failing and failing badly and publicly, which so far has not happened. Now let's go to what is usually the most important aspect of presidential elections, which is the economy. By all conventional economic metrics, the economy is strong, and President Biden has a strong economy to run on. In general, presidents get reelected. More specifically, when the economy looks the way today's economy looks, presidents overwhelmingly get themselves reelected. The stock market continues to achieve all-time high after all-time high. Unemployment still under 4% for a record period of time. We have totally healthy 3% GDP growth. Inflation was high. It's now at a much more normal, roughly 3%. And so if you're looking for a country that has recovered the best from the COVID-19 pandemic and the recession that came with it, you would be hard pressed to find a place that did it better than the United States under Joe Biden. And he at least deserves some credit for that, especially when Trump said it would be an economic disaster under Biden. And it certainly hasn't been. So the goal is Biden and his surrogates have to make that case effectively to voters. And we know from people like Rachel Bitecofer and others, often that critical time during which voters say, how is the economy doing and how am I going to vote? It kicks off around Labor Day, which is September, still several months away. So the numbers are in Biden's favor when it comes to the economy. He doesn't have to lie about them. He doesn't have to distort them. He does have to convince the American people that this is the reality. And recent polling doesn't show that. So there is still time. And in general, an economy the way today's economy looks is very good for presidents getting reelected. What about abortion? Another issue that is going to motivate Democrats and many independents to vote for a Democrat is abortion. Polls show 60% of Americans believe abortion should be legal in most cases, as abortion rights are being rolled back in states across the country, with Trump cheering that thanks to him, thanks to his 3 Supreme Court nominations during his presidency, Roe v. Wade was overturned. Abortion and the right-wing attacks on contraception and IVF aren't helping them. And we've seen these very surprising election results in state referenda since Roe v. Wade was overturned in 2022. So abortion will be on the ballot in Florida. It may be on the ballot in Arizona and Nevada. This arguably is going to help Joe Biden even more. And then we get to fundraising. The fundraising case is one that is extraordinarily lopsided in Joe Biden's favor. Biden has raised more than $180 million from January 1, 2023 to April 30, 2024. Trump has raised $120 million during that same period. In other words, Biden is raising 50% more money than Trump. I don't like the way that we finance politics, but fundraising is a very good proxy to voter enthusiasm. The DNC has more money than the RNC, and Biden continues to demonstrate an ability to outraise Trump over the long run, which is a very good sign. Now, we should also say a word about protest votes and about third party and independent candidates. Trump has had a tougher time dealing with protest votes than Biden during these primaries. And this suggests that whatever you're hearing, there is more discontent within the Republican Party than within the Democratic Party. Weeks after dropping out of the race, Nikki Haley received 22% of the primary vote in Indiana and Maryland. Needless to say, somewhere between 1/6 and 1/5 of Republican primary voters are going out of their way to vote for Nikki Haley weeks or even months after she has dropped out. Now, for comparison, Biden contended with a campaign to vote uncommitted in Michigan over the Israel-Gaza conflict. This was going to be the big protest vote against Biden, and it only got 13% of the Democratic primary vote. So this shows a much greater dissatisfaction with Trump within the Republican Party than it does dissatisfaction with Biden within the Democratic Party. Now, additionally, the polling is still shifting. It is increasingly looking like the strongest independent candidate, Robert F. Kennedy Jr., takes more votes from Trump than he does from Biden. The numbers are shifting, but it's increasingly looking like that. And that is also bad news for Trump and very good news for Joe Biden. So remember, Biden won in 2020. Trump needs to do everything he did in 2020, plus take states from Biden. And RFK seems to be making it tougher for Trump to do that. So the case for Biden is very strong. I've now outlined the strongest possible argument for why Trump will win. I did that yesterday. And the strongest possible argument for why Biden will win. I believe both arguments are compelling and fact-based. And the situation we find ourselves in is that this will be a close election, likely coming down to under 500,000 votes in 3 to 5 states. The only way to figure out the outcome is to vote on November 5th and wait for the results. And it really does, at the end of the day, depend on us. Now, what I want to hear from you, info@davidpakman.com, is now that I've made both cases, which case feels stronger to you? Info@davidpakman.com. Let me know.